One of my favorite stories in Scripture is the story of the Exodus. God hears the cries of his people in Egypt, and then he sends 10 plagues to convince Pharaoh to let his people go. This is in Exodus chapter 3, beginning at verse 7. I love this compassionate idea of God, but then I also want to kind of focus today on what does this God of miracles, and in the miracles he does through the plagues, what does this represent for us as his people? The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. God is attentive. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a land flowing with milk and honey. So now, go, he tells Moses. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. This whole sequence of events happens where Moses is out in the middle of the desert. He was a royal official in Egypt, and then he kills a man. He ends up fleeing to avoid prosecution, and he lands in Midian. His father-in-law, Jethro, is the high priest of Midian. He marries a woman named Zipporah. He's kind of living the dream. It's a different dream than he had before. The last one was a lot more glitz and glam and power, and this one's a lot more humility, but he seems content. He's got his family around him. He's got his wife. He's got his job, but he's a shepherd. And in Egyptian society, that's the lowest you could possibly get, is to be a shepherd. And here's where he finds himself. Thinks to himself, you know what? I've had my run, I've had my fun, and now I'm here, and I'm just loving it, until one day he comes across a bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up. It's not being consumed, but it has all the principles of being burning. And there's this one of the great pictures of Scripture is this burning bush speaking to Moses, saying, I want you to go, and I want you to go to Egypt, and I want you to speak to the God King Pharaoh and tell him that there is a real God, and I am the God, and I am the God of all the other gods. I am the king of everything. All the other gods are fake and futile, and they're nothing. They're nothing compared to me. So when you do actually a backstory on the plagues that are sent on Egypt, and I don't remember them all exactly, but there's like the water of the Nile is turned to blood, frogs come out of the land, darkness over all of the world, the Egyptian world, and then ultimately culminating the death of the firstborn. The irony is what God's doing in these things. It wasn't God going, I'm going to whimsically drum up some fun things to cast on Egypt. Each of those plagues is actually representative of a God of Egypt that our God chases down and says, you think that this God's in charge of this? Let me show you what I can do. For instance, like the God of the Nile is named Hapi, and Hapi. And so the very first plague, they say, oh, you guys worship the God of the Nile, Hapi? You worship them? You think they're powerful? You think they're better than me? Yahweh comes in and he says, then stop this from turning to blood. He turns all of the Nile River into blood. So the people where this is their actual life source, they have no way of watering their crops or doing anything else. And after that subsides, he moves on to other gods, Heket and Ra and Nut and all these other gods, like the god of fertility. God sends frogs on the land that are repopulating at a rate that's impossible to stop. He brings darkness to throw it in the face of the sun god, Ra. And he says, if you worship these other gods, you need to understand I'm more powerful than all of them, until he gets to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the God of life, the God of everything, the most powerful one. And Pharaoh gets to decide when the sun comes up, when the sun goes down, and what is what. And God says, well, if you're the God of life, then I'm going to bring death to the firstborn in all of Egypt, except for those who were covered by the blood of the Lamb. It's a great story. You can go check it out. But here's what I love about God. I love that God comes into our cultures. He looks at the gods that we're worshiping, and then he demonstrates his absolute omnipotence and power over them. And then when you're sitting there with the old fake gods that you worshiped, God simply says, do you want me to be your deliverer, or do you want to sit and stew in that last season of worshiping that fake God? And for me, in my life, in different seasons, it's been so fun. Not at the time. At the time, it was terrible. At the time, it was like, God, how could you take the Nile away? How could you take the sun away? How could you take these things away? But now in the rearview mirror, I am left with a God who loves me, who I know and who knows me, who said, how much more calm do you live every day knowing that the God who's the God of all those other fake foreign idols is with you, calls you son, calls you daughter? What kind of comfort should that bring us? So know one thing, that if you're worshiping a God that isn't Yahweh, do not be surprised when it gets torn down. And two, what you'll find on the other side of that God getting torn down is the God, Yahweh, is sitting next to you saying, I'm still good and I'm still here. When we lean into that, we're going to find the true peace that passes understanding that Scripture talks about, if we're willing to let him have that. We'll see you guys tomorrow.